Welcome to this week's Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. I'm Susan Littlefield, and what an interesting week we had. We'll just kind of lump it up into that. Markets that saw a lot of red on the screen, but end up on a Friday turning things around, especially on the livestock side, with some nice green. Ended up with some mixed numbers, though, on the grain complex after a WASDE report, rain, and a lot of talk about what's going to happen, for example, with this winter wheat crop. We're going to take a look at that and a whole lot more of the market's action on this week's episode.
Imagine a future fueled by soy-based possibilities. A future where creativity and productivity live together under one roof. A future that takes you from point A to point B to point Z, all while ensuring brighter tomorrows for our next generation. A soy-based future? It's already here.
Well, welcome back. As you can see, the guys from Tredas are joining us today. PJ and John both joining us to talk markets. And gentlemen, we had a WASDE report that came out on a Friday afternoon. And PJ, kind of first of all, give me your, in a nutshell, thoughts on what those numbers had to say.
It's so bearish, it's bullish, Susan. No, I mean, I think in a nutshell, you look at it and say, yeah, they increased yield a little bit versus trade guess by about 3/4 of a bushel on the corn side of things. Beans they have penciled in at a 52. They're all big numbers, right? I mean, 335 million bushels on the corn side to carry out for this coming crop year, and 2.2 billion on the corn side. Don't exactly give you warm and fuzzies that corn and soybeans are going to rally a bunch, but I think, I don't know this for a fact, but right now everything's perfect, right? We're getting rains. We've had good emergence. Things are really looking like we're going to get off to a great start, and we are off to a great start. So you pencil in the high number. I guess the question is, what's weather going to do in the next 30 days to say, are we going to flip this boat at all? It's actually scary, though, if we're talking about it. The December 2013 corn chart and the December 2023 corn chart really are mimicking each other, coming off similar type years too. So something to keep an eye on. We did have opportunities that year post this report. And I really in my heart think we're going to have opportunities, but my heart doesn't have much to say about it, Susan, because I thought 540 would hold too. And here we are at 508. So
yeah, no kidding. So John, you guys have you have a group discussion that goes around after these reports, and kind of what was your feel and your input and what you saw?
Well, I was actually a little surprised that the market wasn't down a little bit more when I first looked at just the corn and bean numbers on the surface, especially looking out to that 23-24 carryout. They had corn at 2.22 and the beans at, over 300. But then when you looked at wheat, wheat was a pretty bullish report, because even after last year's drought with the high wheat prices, increased acres, they still reduced this year's production of wheat. Because of what's going on in the western United States with the drought in Kansas and those wheat growing areas out there. So that was supportive on the corn side. Now it was supportive kind of the whole complex, corn, beans, and wheat. But then as we finished up here today, beans were off 25 on the new crop, down to 12.23. Old crop was off 14, and then now corn, old crop was actually up 3, but new crop was down 5. So definitely a mixed bag here. And I think to mimic what PJ said, as we go forward, it's going to be, what kind of weather do we get? We've got a pretty decent start, except for extreme northern Midwest, I guess you call that, or northern plains, where they're getting a little slower planting than they'd like. But otherwise, pretty well everywhere else, even where I'm from in Northeast Missouri, we were hurting for water. But we've got some nice rains over the last few days, and I think it's going to, so far, so good. So
there's a lot of people banking on this rain. I heard it called a couple times the $1 million rain or the million bushel rain. And then I've also heard it say too little, too late, especially when you look at I-70 south, Kansas into Oklahoma.
Yeah, that I would say that's probably for the wheat, especially. I mean, there's no doubt about that I-70 south, in the western United States. Now, our wheat crop over here on the eastern side, the Chicago wheat, things are looking good, and you see that in the spread. You got Kansas City wheat, $2.50 roughly higher than Chicago wheat. We should have a decent crop if we do. There are two different types of wheat used in different products, but you could see some of this wheat over in our area in the east moving west if they can blend it off into a very high protein hard wheat crop, whatever is there available. So again, looks like price supportive on wheat, but the other commodities, looks like we're gonna have to. We're gonna need some sort of growing season issue, I think, to get a hell of a lot of support there.
PJ, from a Western Corn Belt stance, I mean, the rain definitely helped the northern areas of Kansas into Colorado and Nebraska, but we know that those growers to the south are maybe going into Plan B with this crop.
Most definitely, like talking to some of our clients in, say, Oklahoma, Texas area, wheat crop's not good. If they do have something there, they're planning for abandoning that, going to something else. I guess to John's point, how much of the Chicago variety can fill the void of the hard red Kansas City variety, and how much can get imported? There's some different thoughts there probably. I know there's some dryness kind of in Canada, and then also you flip over to, say, like Central Russia, some dryness. I think the Brazilian crop, to my understanding, the second Safrinha crop looks pretty good, but on average, you start talking about these reports and the big numbers would seem like they usually come first before any weather scare happens, and then maybe we reduce it. And then it actually becomes a what do we have come September type time frame. But if you look back the last few years, we've always been cutting into carryout as we've gone through the growing season, and then our ending stocks number in August has came in lower, and all of a sudden we have less bushels on hand. It doesn't seem like that would be the case today. And if you're following the export markets, it would tell you that we have lagged on exports and continually do it. And I don't think that's something that changes overnight by any means. So it's a growing concern. The rains in the Western Corn Belt sure help, though. I think that's probably more of sitting here today, we got to believe we're going to have a good crop, because that's what USDA told us. And that's what you got to project. So you got to say we're going to have a good crop. Probably the bad part, I guess, in the Western Corn Belt, if you want to say this is bad, it's not bad. But with the rains we've got, you're going to have more crop grown here. So you might want to take advantage if you can see a 10 to 20 over basis level in these ethanol plants for harvest time. I'm usually not one to say go lock in basis now. But if you look at historical averages, say 10 to 20 over is a home run. So it's something to look at, something to keep your eyes on. Yes, the futures price sucks, but there's always opportunities. So you got to keep your mind open to the opportunities and decouple those futures and basis decisions.
So we look at our neighbors to the north, and earlier, just even 2 weeks ago, the word prevent plant was really being floated around a lot. Even though we're not seeing a lot of corn planting and beans right now, what are you hearing? Is there still a good possibility?
You get to that northern, like Tyler in our office has some guys say north central South Dakota, right on the North Dakota border. And they're not concerned about it at all. I mean, just some rain, but I think you're looking at some very large equipment, and they can knock out acres fast. Their prevent plant day is 2 weeks away. They're going to plant corn. And if they have to take prevent plant, great, but they're going to go after it. So I guess sitting here on May 12th, we're not concerned, but talk to me on May 21st if we get another 2-3 inches of rain over the next 2 weeks too.
All right, John, I'm curious, because we were talking about this before we started the program, and you were talking about next year's export concerns.
Yeah, actually, I saw the StoneX analyst. Actually, he said the numbers that he's seeing. We're looking at the USDA had I don't know the exact export number, but with the carryout they were projecting was 2.2. Arlen was saying somewhere in the range. He thought that was their exports were overstated, possibly 200 to 300 million bushels. So all of a sudden, you throw 200 to 300 on top of 2.2 billion. Now we're up to 2.4, 2.5 billion. And, I don't want to sit here and predict what price is going to do, tomorrow, let alone 18 months from now. But we all know that at 2.5 billion and above, we are getting into corn with a 3 in front of it again. And to touch on what Phil said earlier, we're looking at this 23 chart is looking very similar to the 13 chart, where we were at 560 roughly for the spring price and worked our way all the way down to the low 4s by the time we got to harvest. So we just need to be aware that even if we don't like the price, nobody cares, whether we like it or not. Obviously, you mentioned, feed yards probably wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of relief on these corn prices, but either way, just keep your mind open to using, some other options or something to hedge yourself and leave your upside open, because this, the markets can go down. For 2.5 years, they've only gone up, but it is what it is.
Yeah. What do you see as maybe your go-to watch over the next, week or so from a grain perspective that folks need to keep in mind?
Oh, it's going to be probably weather driven and geopolitical. Which keeping an eye on geopolitical, I just turn the news off because I mean, I'll find out, within a few minutes what the market's doing. If something's going on in the with the trade corridor and things like that. So
Okay. PJ, wanted to switch gears a little bit and look at the livestock side of the trade and saw some softer southern cash earlier in the week. Some say that kind of set the tone for this cattle market this week.
It probably did, but you look at just general momentum in the market flipped over here probably in the last 3, 4 trading days, and we're trying to touch or battle back towards some of those contract highs. And where we go from here is anybody's guess, but it does seem from talking to some of our Western Nebraska ranchers, they're sure thrilled to have the rain and not have to liquidate some herd this year. Maybe we'll get enough grass to make that all happen. The cattle market's been, at least it's not the hog market. The hog market's sure been trouble to get any traction, but the cattle's kind of been on the other side where we've stayed or stayed at a higher level and had a good support there to keep things moving forward. So, yeah, it's all a good win right now, and especially if you're a cattle guy and don't have all your feed use locked in, this should be a dream scenario. But the problem is most of those guys have corn too, so it's not a win-win always.
Definitely going to be some interesting times. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this week. Any parting thoughts from anybody?
Have a plan and stick to it.
have a plan and don't get too far off in the weeds and get upset with the market because it doesn't necessarily go to your plan. Just have the plan, but then also have a contingency to protect the downside. But leave plenty of flexibility in it.
All right. Well, we wish all the moms out there watching a very happy Mother's Day, and also remind you that commodity futures options involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup.